it opens the window on opens the door on peels the lid off, pick your cliche, off this still churning war over restitution in Germany and Europe and the art world at large.
I have the privilege today to be speaking with Jamie Kastner, the director of The Spoils. Jamie, thank you so much for chatting with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Honestly, The Spoils is absolutely fascinating. Um, what is it that made you want to tell the story?
Well, I was sort of coming off a film in 2019 called There Are No Fakes about a large-scale art fraud and a kind of unlikely brawl around the work of Indigenous artist Norval Morrisseau. And a journalist, academic friend of mine saw the film and had been doing work on the story of Max Stern and said, "This story is up your alley." And Max Stern, who I had heard of vaguely, was a German Jewish dealer who settled in Montreal after having had his family gallery liquidated in a forced Nazi-approved Jew auction, as they were called, in 1937 in Cologne. And he paid the proceeds to the Nazis, barely made it out with his life, and wound up interned in Canada because by the time war broke out, he was an illegal alien as a German, and somehow starting from nothing again, built himself to become one of the largest art dealers in Canada. And the restitution project in his name, following his death, has become the most successful restitution project in the world. And as I learned about their latter-day battles to get paintings back and to achieve justice as they see it in Dusseldorf and elsewhere, I could tell it was a fascinating, thorny, not straightforward subject. So just my cup of tea.
Well, this really is sort of a sort of messy in the broadest of sense. Like there's argumentation about ownership, there's the history, there's the fact that Max Stern had no family.
Right.
There are so many complicated details about him. What surprised you most about Max's story?
Well, his in a way, I to be perfectly honest, I am, I gather, not the first producer to try to get a film going on Max Stern's story. And I mean, Max, so many Holocaust related stories. You think you know everything about the Holocaust, and then you learn someone else's family story, and it's some other incredible shade that you had never thought of. And so I mean, I felt that the details, I didn't know about forced Jew auctions. I didn't know about the scale of looting. This is art is but one example of the vast scale of Nazi looting of Jewish property that occurred. And it's perhaps the one we know the most about because art's value is linked to its provenance, the list of its ownership historically, unlike, let's say, a candlestick or a valuable carpet or something. There's no way of measuring the other objects that Nazis looted and sold or sold in kind of appropriated department stores, all this stuff that went on, but is much less known. So that whole world was interesting to me. Just the fact that and beyond his story itself, another thing, historically is just that period of pre-Holocaust of the Nazis in power in Germany from 1933 to 39 prior to the war, and the gradual stripping away of rights. And how did that go from them being, coming into power and German Jews having been such an integrated part of society there to, being thrown into ovens in less than a decade. So those stages of that, which were fascinating to look into, and also incredibly resonant of so much in our own times. with just read the news every day of what's going on in the US, let alone, the rise of the far right in all sorts of countries. So there was all that, but then finally, it was just the fact that there was still a latter day battle going on over the restitution of Nazi looted art. I really had very little. I was aware of the woman in gold. I just didn't understand the scale of it
Yeah.
and getting into the weeds of it and what a pitched battle and how ongoing it is.
Yeah, it is wild. And actually, I'm glad you said that because so often when we hear about the Holocaust, we hear about the war years,
Right.
but we are seeing the gradual increase in this
Yeah.
particular film. And,
Kind of progressive dehumanization and stripping away of rights.
yeah, it's even the signs on the wall and
Yeah.
or in the people's stores. It's like, oh, this is a Jewish business. Well, oh, stay away from that. It was fascinating to see just piece by piece
Yeah.
how much was taken away.
No, it's amazing that the footage is all out there. I mean,
Yeah,
of course, much credit due to our visual researcher Aaron Chisholm and the editor Mike Hannon who put it all together so beautifully. But yes, it is end of the day, there it all is. There was no hiding it. Look at the scale. Look at how everybody was kind of gleefully participating in it. It's wild.
yeah, absolutely. One of the things I think is fascinating is the statement is used that these paintings are the last prisoners of war. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you think that's true?
Actually, I believe that that statement was first made in this context by Ronald Lauder, who of the Estee Lauder company, fortune, whatever, who was uh, the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Austria at a certain point, and became an early champion of the whole issue of art restitution, an issue which reared its head again in the 90s in the wake of scandals surrounding abandoned holdings in Swiss banks. Jewish money that was being unearthed in Swiss bank accounts. And then that began the ball of wax rolling. Well, what about this artwork and what about property, etc. And so, yes, Clarence Epstein of the Max Stern restitution project at the center of this film echoes that statement. And of course, it is hotly contested by let's just call him an anti-restitution lawyer on the other side, Ludwig von Puffendorf, who turns up in battle after battle, restitution case after restitution case in Germany, always objecting or almost always objecting to the restitution. Um, so the last prisoners of war. I mean, I think it's you realize this is an ongoing battle. It's a battle that is not clearly mapped out in German law.
Yeah,
And so, however, it is a battle over moral issues as well as legal ones, and it's a battle that's being fought out in the press to some degree. So it's a PR battle too. Hence, statements like, these paintings are the last prisoners of war are clearly and cleverly designed phrase making to
mhm,
get people to think about this issue as a living scandal.
yeah,
I do think it's an ongoing scandal. While I recognize that phrase as also being a salvo in a rhetorical battle. I guess the analogy is apt enough for its purpose. That is to say, to draw attention to this as an ongoing, shocking, scandalous issue. How literal you have to get, what is the analogy between a prisoner of war as someone still living in a camp? But I mean, okay, it starts to break down after a certain point, but I think it serves a useful function as a kind of headline. I mean, as an opposing headline, I'll tell you that drew my attention, part of drawing my attention to this issue. It doesn't, it was the working title of this film for a while, was based on a headline of an op-ed piece in a major German newspaper, written by another anti-restitution auctioneer. And the line was, "They say Holocaust and mean money." When
Mm.
I heard that that kind of thing was being published and said openly in Germany today, after, what one knows about Germany's, reparations efforts and apparently, cross the board sadness about the crimes of the past, I was shocked to hear that this was being said out loud, and that those two statements kind of give you a sense of those two slogans give you a sense of the battle lines in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that you described it as a moral issue because you've got Puffendorf who's arguing legally, if you've owned it for 10 years, it's yours.
Bought it in good faith, according to German law, it's yours. That's right.
Absolutely. And you hear these comments, I think I forget who it is that said it. But somebody's making a point, and he said when they're talking about the history or a history of Germany, they say, "Well, we're so sorry for the things we've done. We're so sorry for everything." But in terms of art, it's a different story.
Right.
Uh, uh, is
Yeah.
it though? But is it? I mean, I know it isn't, but I know it is. But is it?
Well, again, this is part of what I learned and found fascinating over the course of working on this. That statement was made by Willie Corta, who is a fascinating guy. He is the main kind of art investigator with the Max Stern project. He is a German guy himself, though long based in DC, and but can speak firsthand as he is doing in the quotation you're referring to. He's saying, I grew up in Germany, and it was always the public statements were always never again, never again. And but he once you get into the weeds with a piece of disputed property, suddenly there's a million reasons why they can't give it back.
Yeah.
That is, and it does, you know, as I started wading into this and I started realizing, well, this is not a straightforward issue. It's true. What do you do with a crime of so long ago, and who now is responsible? And it's not as though Puffendorf's arguments are entirely without merit or credibility. I think the film would be a lot more boring if they were. It is a genuinely tricky issue. However, when you hear people getting all lawyerly about, well, how much were Jews suffering in trying to determine the ownership of a piece of work now? How much were Jews suffering in the spring of 34 versus the fall of 35? I mean, were they allowed to legally operate their business but not cross the street? Could they sit on public benches? Could they, it it it's and knowing where it all led, it sounds extremely tone deaf
Mm.
to, modern Canadian ears. The fact, just as a Canadian analogy, can you imagine a committee to decide whether Indigenous art should be restituted, as an example, in Canada, as an, made up hypothetical here. But can you imagine such a committee here that did not involve any Indigenous people on the committee?
Yeah.
That has long been the case on the looted art, decision board in Germany, where the argument against having Jews on the board is that, well, they would be too biased.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's a great point. I mean, when we think about restitution, you know, in a Canadian context, like we see this conversation going on with Indigenous art.
Yeah.
And here, there's a genuine power, seems to be genuine power in restitution. And I was wondering in your mind, what is that power of restitution in terms of art and history?
Well, I think that there were many things about the Max Stern project that made it challenging as to make as a documentary, but I think are useful as as useful in what they bring to light about the larger issue of restitution. two quick examples. One is that there are no living heirs. You would have had a simpler movie if you had a protagonist. Max Stern is dead. He had no children. You've had a simpler, more heartrending movie to make if you had a grandchild pursuing something that had obvious emotional stakes. The flip side of that is that the counter argument against these claims, as I mentioned vis-a-vis that offensive headline before, is that these are just modern Jews going after money.
Mm.
You can't make that argument with the Stern Project because they are they're academics, they're art historians, they're lawyers, they're archivists.
Yeah.
They are a project whose sole mission is justice. There are not huge, and the other challenge is that there is no woman in gold. There is, no famous Klimt painting that inspired the Helen Mirren movie. There is no painting that valuable or that eye-catching in the Stern collection. However, the absence of that is actually makes this story much more representative of the scale of Nazi looting, of
Mm.
which was vast, incalculable, largely because unlike paintings, household objects don't have any provenance or way to trace them. So for those two reasons, as an example to answer your question, uh, um, I think it's there's a kind it has that well, it has power. It's power. It's a powerful issue and a powerful thing to either do or fail to have done to get a work of art restituted because there's actual value attached.
Mm.
Paintings often have gone increased in value, multiple times since the war. That's why it's being so hotly contested. But there's also a moral core to it as well. And there is a feeling of social justice and a feeling of the wrongs of the past having been righted. Now, the other side, right, rightly, it is tricky what that is, how you determine justice. I mean, if it were simple, it would be a very short film.
For sure. And I know we're starting to run out of time, but with that in mind, Jamie, we see this exhibit and the tension around the exhibit. Will it happen? Won't it happen? The
The canceled Max Stern
cancel
exhibition
Max
from
Stern exhibit.
2015. Yeah.
And I was wondering in your mind why there seems to be a fear to engaging that conversation because you just see these roadblocks after roadblocks that get thrown in its way.
Well, I think that the Max Stern story and the stories that we explore in this film, which is the tracing the trajectory of two restitution attempts and two botched attempts to hold exhibitions honoring Max Stern. I think the reasons for all the conflicts around it's really hopefully the particular that sheds light on a universal issue here. Um, it opens the window opens the door on peels the lid off, pick your cliche, off this still churning war over restitution in Germany and Europe and the art world at large. And I think the reasons it's so you see Germany really on one level really grappling with its past.
Mm.
How much do people really want to dig into the nitty-gritty of what went on not that long ago that resulted in this painting being in this owner's hands today? Per the earlier comment of Willie Corta, everybody's down with the general, never again, never again. But when you start to think about what happened to all of that property, have come through this process to see the Holocaust as the greatest smash and grab job of all time. Like what a scam, what a scheme. You kill all these people, you steal all their property, and they're all dead. So it makes for much fewer descendants to come and make claims to this. Meanwhile, you continue to occupy these buildings, this real estate, these furnish it with these artworks. I mean, it's fairly horrifying when you start thinking through it. And now I don't know. It's not an easy answer as to who is responsible for this or who should pay this back or who should give back what today, but there's no doubt that all that property is still out there. It kind of lives to tell the tale. And I guess the fight is over how much of the tale is each side prepared to have told.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really appreciate it. Honestly, the film is great.
Thank you. Thank
Uh,
you very much.
it is really, truly fascinating. Jamie Kastner, the director of The Spoils. Thanks so much, Jamie. I really
Thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Bye bye.